Hello there. It's so nice to be back before you again. And before I begin, I want to tell you about the place that you see behind me. And what you are looking at is you are looking at the original temple that sits on top of the real Mount Zion. This location is located in the place called Tel Arad. And the reason it's called Tel Arad is because it was King Hadrian that moved the people from the original location that you see right here, and they moved them to the city of Ammon, actually where the other Jerusalem is to that you currently know today. But this right here was the Jebusite city, and where we are, or where you see right there, that is where the temple was built on top of the hill in the Jebusite city. And that hill is Mount Zion. And what you are looking at around Mount Zion, and this is current today, you are looking at the city of Jerusalem. Actually, there's no city there now because the story lets us know that all of the nations from around about, they came about and they besieged Jerusalem and they tore down the walls of the temple. And if you look at the temple walls are torn down. That means they almost tore it all the way down to the ground. And if you come to this particular area, you will see where the walls were torn down to the ground that surrounded the city of Jerusalem. Now, this here, a temple, which was the temple of Yahweh that sits on top of the original Mount Zion, is right there. All you have to do is go right across the Kidron Valley, and you will run to the where the Gihon Spring is, because the Gihon Spring is below the temple, and then the water would run down from the temple right on into the Gihon Spring. And so it was prophesied that this particular area will stay a wilderness until the original children of Israel would return home. And as it was prophesied, even today, this area, which is where the city of Jerusalem was, which where is the place of the temple, it is barren, as the scripture has said. It is a wilderness, as the scripture has said, and it is awaiting. She is still sitting in her Sabbath, and she is still awaiting the return of the children, the house of Israel. The children, we who were carried away into the north, she is still waiting for us to come home. So Jerusalem and the land is still in mourning, and she's still in her Sabbath, and she is still lamenting. And we're going to return. We don't know exactly when we'll return, but all this region and all this area, we will fill it up. And according to the prophecy says that there will not be enough room for us when we do come, that the Father will then, he will enlarge the earth, and all of the fir trees and all of the various beautiful trees and everything will start to come alive again. And these are the signs that we wait for, because upon our return and the time that we are to enter back into the city, everything in this region where you see, which is looks so naked and bare, because we're not there, it shall come forth, it shall begin to blossom. And so for many years, and for over 20 or 30 years, I have been sitting and I have been watching Jerusalem. I have been watching our home, awaiting for it to awaken and rise. And I've been waiting for all the wonderful trees and all the blossoms and everything there to begin to awaken and come alive. But anyway, let me get back to my story. Now, what I was talking about is I was talking about the sale, and I was talking about the sale of Jehoshaphat. And so I am telling a story, and I'm going to be doing it in parts, and I'm going to be doing it in multiple parts because it's so much to read here. And book is not just about Yehoshua, but this book is about the story of the children of Israel. And at this particular point, I'm in volume 2, and there's a volume 1 and volume 2 and volume 3. Actually, I should have started in the beginning. And in the beginning, it talks about the creation of the earth, which is very in depth. But anyway, I will begin right here where I left off. And where I left off is dealing with the sound. Now, it was like, honey, while the brethren of Jehoshaphat were deliberating upon his fate, 7 Midianitish merchantmen, they passed near the pit in which he lay. Remember, they threw him all down in that dang old dark pit. They noticed that many birds were circling above it, which they assumed that there must be water there. And they, being very thirsty, they made a halt. Can you see them run? I said, oh, Lord, let us hurry up and get over there. So they made a halt to get over there in order to refresh themselves. You know, it's not like it is now. They wasn't able to just go and turn on the faucet. They had to find some water. And so they were very excited. And you can imagine they were very excited. Oh, just running over there, just thinking, oh, we finally found water. And so, but when they came close, they heard Yehoshaphat, and Yehoshaphat was screaming, and he was yelling, and he was hurting, he was in pain, and they looked down into the pit, and they saw a youth of a beautiful picture and a comely appearance. And they said comely, he was beautiful to look upon. Okay, and they called to him, saying, who art thou? Who brought you here? And who cast you into this pit in the wilderness? And they were so compassionate that they all joined together and they began to drag him up. And they took him along with them when they continued on their journey. And unfortunately, they had to pass his brothers. Now remember, these brothers didn't have no love for him at all, honey. And so you know they was pretty pissed that somebody had the nerve to go and pull the brother that they wanted to perish out of the well or whatever, the pit. Okay. So they passed by them, and the brothers who called out to the Midianites, and they said, why have you done such a thing to steal our slave and carry him away with you? We threw the lad into the pit because he was very disobedient. Now then, return our slave to us. And the Midianites replied, what? This lad? You mean you say that is your slave? Your servant? Is it more likely, is it that you all are his slaves, you slaves unto him, honey, for in beauty of form and in pleasant looks and fair appearance, he excelleth you all. Why then will you speak lies unto us? We ain't giving you nothing. We will not even hearken to your words, nor do we even believe you. But we found the lad in the wilderness, in a pit, and we took him out, and we will carry him away with us on our journey. But the sons of Jacob, they insisted, like we said, restore our slave to us, lest you meet death with the edge of the sword. Well, you know, the Midianites, they were unaffrighted. honey, and the Midianites, they drew their weapons, honey. And amid war whoops, they prepared to enter into a combat with the sons of Jacob. But then that Simeon rose up and with a bare sword he sprang upon the Midianites at the same time, uttering a cry that made the earth reverberate. Oh, I can't say the word reverberate. Okay. The Midianites, they fell down in great consternation, and he said, I am Simeon, and the son of the Hebrew Jacob, who destroyed the city of Shechem, alone and unaided, and together with my brethren, honey. He didn't say honey, but that's me. And together with my brethren, I destroyed the city of the Amorites. Yahweh do so and more also, if it be not true that all of the Midianites, your brethren, unite with all the Canaanites to fight with me, cannot hold out against me. Now, restore the boy, okay? Restore the boy you took from us, else will I give your flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Now, he was like, try me if you want to. Whew, with all of that, honey. And especially the earth reverberating, the Midianites were so greatly afraid of Simon and terrified and abashed. They spake to the sons of Jacob with little courage and said, you not that, said you not that you had cast this lad into the pit because he was a rebellious spirit? Now, what now will you do with an insubordinate slave? Rather sell him to us, and we are ready to pay any price you desire. Now, this speech was part of the purpose of the Most High. He had put it into the heart of the Midianites to insist upon possessing Jehoshaphat, that he might not remain with his brethren and be slain by them. Now his brethren assented, and Jehoshaphat was sold as a slave while they set over their meal. And the Most High spake a saying, and it was this: over a meal did you sell your brother, and thus shall Ahasuerus sell your descendants to Haman over a meal. And because you have sold Jehoshaphat to be a slave, therefore you shall say year after year, slaves we were unto Pharaoh in Egypt. And so when he was saying that, what he was saying also was that we, his descendants, all the way down, shall continue to talk about how we were slaves in Egypt. Because we still talk about it today, even unto this day. Okay? Now the price paid for Jehoshaphat by the Midianites was 20 pieces of silver, enough for a pair of shoes for each of his brethren. And there were 11 sons, and one included him. Okay? And it says, thus they sold the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. Now, one thing about it, though Jehoshaphat had done what he had done, he was a a righteous young man. He grew up to be a very righteous young man. But at the time that they sold him, uh, uh, he needed some clothes and he needed some shoes. He was needy at that time, because they had stripped him of everything. They had stripped him even from the place that he was, and they sold him as a slave. So he was very needy. At that point, he was very needy because all that he had, all that he possessed, and his father and his family was a very wealthy family. And he went from a very wealthy family. He went from a very wealthy family to a very poor young man with absolutely nothing as a slave. Okay. So it said the price paid for Jehoshaphat by the Midianites again was 20 pieces of silver, enough for a pair of shoes for each of the brethren. Thus they sold the righteous again for a pair of shoes, for the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of shoes. Now, if we go into this, it also says, for so handsome a youth as Jehoshaphat, it said the sum that was paid was too low by far, but his appearance had been greatly changed by the horrible anguish he had endured in that pit with those snakes and those scorpions, that he had lost his beautiful complexion and he looked shallow and sickly, and the Midianites were justified in paying a small sum for him indeed. The merchantmen had come upon Joseph's naked in the pit, for his brethren had stripped him of all his clothes, that he might not appear before men in an unseemly condition. The Most High sent Gabriel down to him, and the angel enlarged the amulet hanging from Jehoshaphat's neck until it was a garment that covered him entirely. Now, Jehoshaphat's brothers were looking after him as he had departed with the Midianites. And when they saw him with clothes upon him, they cried after him, "Give us his raiment." We sold him naked without clothes. His owners refused to yield to their demands, but they agreed to reimburse the brethren with 4 pairs of shoes. And Jehoshaphat kept his garment, the same in which he was arrayed when he arrived in Egypt and was sold to Potiphar, the same in which he was locked up in the prison and appeared before Pharaoh, and the same he wore when he was the ruler over Egypt. Now, let me talk about this thing for a minute. They had already stripped him. They had already stripped him naked, and they wanted him actually to go into Egypt naked, there with no clothes on, and really, you know what I'm saying? So they wanted him to be ashamed. So guess what happened in turn? They were made ashamed. You know what I'm saying? They shoes that they talking about they gonna tread on him with they shoes, and they not gonna take the money and buy nothing to eat with it. You know what I'm saying? Because that'd be like eating some blood money, honey. But they gonna buy these shoes, and when they gonna think in their mind, when they putting these shoes on, we treading on him with our shoes. Mm-hmm. Oh, but they get that payback, because Jehoshaphat's slaves, they took the shoes off of their feet, and they made them bow down and prostrate before Jehoshaphat. And he was so beautiful and radiant and handsome and of great stature that they didn't even recognize their brother. And when they had to bow before him and prostrate before them, they didn't even realize that it was their brother Jehoshaphat that they were prostrating to. And at the same time, when you think about it, they gonna say, give us the clothes that he was wearing, because when we sold him to you, he was naked. You know what I'm saying? So give us them clothes. and everything. You know, they wanted him to go naked, but to be ashamed. But not only were their shoes from their feet taken off right at the gate, and they had to prostrate before Jehoshaphat, but not only that, the slaves spit on them. Okay, okay, they spit on them. Oh my gosh, and that was truly a shameful thing. These big, strong men, you know what I'm saying, had been reduced to suffering with famine, and then to make insult to injury, they had to get their shoes taken off, and they were spit on, and had to prostrate before this second to the king in Egypt, not recognizing that that was their brother. He was so fine and so handsome, and looked as just so noble that they didn't even realize who he was at that time. Lord, have mercy. Lord, Lord, Lord. So let me go on. So they didn't want him to have no clothes. No, they want him to have no clothes. And I'm trying to find out where I was. Oh, but anyway, so since I don't know where I was, you know, this is a video and I am reading. So if I end up reading something a second time after I read it, just look over that for a minute. So anyway, they wanted his clothes. They wanted the clothes he had on. They wanted him walking on into Egypt naked. And remember when they began to round us up, when they destroyed the walls of Jerusalem that you see behind me. When they destroyed the walls of Jerusalem, and they brought the cannons and all these other kind of things, and they began to blast the walls, and all the armies from around the then earth at that particular time, all of the nations that came to destroy us, they also made us strip, and we also had to march and walk naked as they walked us along the way into the bellies of ships to be able to come over here throughout the Caribbean and throughout the North America and into America and where all the other places that we were transported to. And we were naked and barefoot as well, with yokes and chains on our necks. The only thing, I guess, they didn't put yokes and chains on our ancestors' necks when they were in Egypt. But anyway, as I say, sometimes I like to get off topic, but it's okay. Anyway, I'm still continuing on. So they said, we sold him naked without clothes. But his owners refused to yield to their demands, but they agreed to reimburse the brethren with 4 pairs of shoes. And Jehoshaphat kept his garment, okay, the same in which he was arrayed when he arrived in Egypt, and was sold to Potiphar, the same in which he was locked up in prison and appeared before Pharaoh, and the same he wore when he was the ruler over Egypt. Oh, Imhotep. Okay. Now as an atonement for the 20 pieces of silver taken by his brethren in exchange for Jehoshaphat, the Most High commanded that every firstborn son shall be redeemed by the priests with an equal amount, and also every Israelite must pay annually to the sanctuary as much as fell to each of the brethren as his share of the price. The brethren of Jehoshaphat bought shoes for the money, for they said, we will not eat it, because it is the price for the blood of our brother. But we will tread upon him for that he spake, he would have dominion over us, and we will see what will become of his dreams. And for this reason, the ordinance has been commanded that he who refuses to raise up a name in Israel unto his brethren that hath died without having a son shall have his shoes loosed from off his foot, and his face shall be spit upon. Jehoshaphat's brethren refused to do aught to preserve his life, and therefore the Most High loosed their shoes from off their feet. For when they went down to Egypt, the slaves of Jehoshaphat took their shoes off their feet as they entered the gates, and they prostrated themselves before Jehoshaphat as before Pharaoh. And as they lay prostrate, they were spit upon, and they were put to shame before the Egyptians. Now the Midianites, they pursued their journey to Gilead, but they soon regretted the purchase that they had made. They feared that Joseph had been stolen in the land of the Hebrews, though sold to them as a slave. And if his kinsmen should find him with them, they feared that death would be inflicted upon them for the abduction of a free man. The high-handed manner of the sons of Jacob confirmed their suspicions that they might be capable of man's death. And their wicked deed would explain, too, why they had accepted so small an amount, so small a sum in exchange for Jehoshaphat. Now, while discussing these points, they saw coming their way the traveling company of Ishmaelites that had been observed earlier by the sons of Jacob. And they determined to dispose of Jehoshaphat to them, that they might at least not lose the price that they had paid, and might escape the danger at the same time of being made captive for the crime of kidnapping a man. And the Ishmaelites bought Jehoshaphat from the Midianites, and they paid the same price as the former owners had given for him. Now let's talk about Jehoshaphat's three masters. Now, as a rule, the only merchandise with which the Ishmaelites loaded their camels was pitch and was the skins of beasts. And a providential dispensation they carried, and by a providential dispensation, they carried bags of perfumery this time, instead of their usual ill-smelling freight, that sweet fragrance might be wafted to Jehoshaphat on his journey in Egypt. Now, these aromatic substances were well suited to Jehoshaphat, whose body emitted a pleasant smell, so agreeable and pervasive that the road along which he traveled was redolent thereof. And on his arrival in Egypt, the perfume from his body spread over the whole land. And the royal princesses, they followed the sweet scent to trace its source, reached the place in which Jehoshaphat was. Even after his death, the same fragrance was spread abroad by his bones, enabling Moshe to distinguish Jehoshaphat's remains from all the others and keep the oath of the children of Israel to enter them in the Holy Land. So when Jehoshaphat learned that the Ishmaelites were carrying him to Egypt, he began to weep bitterly at the thought of being removed so far from Canaan and from his father. And one of the Ishmaelites, he had noticed that Joseph's weeping and crying and thinking that he had found riding uncomfortable, he lifted him from the back of the camel and permitted him to walk on foot. But Joseph continued to weep and sob and crying incessantly, "Oh, Father, Father." Another one of the caravan, tired of his limitations, he beat him, causing only the more tears and wails until the youth, exhausted by grief, he was unable to move on. Now all the Ishmaelites in the company dealt out blows to him. They treated him with relentless cruelty and tried to silence him by threats. But the Most High, he looked down and he saw the trouble and the distress that Jehoshaphat was in, and he sent darkness and terror upon the Ishmaelites, and their hands grew rigid when they raised them to inflict it. Astonished, they asked themselves why God did thus unto them upon the road. They did not know that it was for the sake of Jehoshaphat. Man, I'm telling you, the journey was continued until they came to Ephraim, the place of Rachel's sepulture. And Jehoshaphat hastened to his mother's grave, and throwing himself across it, he groaned and he cried, saying, "Oh, mother, mother, that didst bear me, arise, come forth and see how thy son has been sold into slavery, with none to take pity upon him. Arise and see thy son, and weep with me over my misfortune, and observe the heartlessness of my brethren. Awake, O mother, rouse thyself from thy sleep. Rise up and prepare for the conflict with my brethren who have stripped me, even of my shirt. And they sold me as a slave to merchant men, who in turn sold me to others, and without mercy. Without mercy, Mom, they tore me away from my father. Arise, accuse my brethren before the Most High, and see whom he will justify in the judgment and whom he will find guilty. Arise, O mother. Arise, O mother, and wake from your sleep. See how my father is with me in his soul, and in his spirit comfort him and ease his heavy heart. Jehoshaphat wept and cried upon the grave of his mother until, weary from grief, he lay immovable as a stone. Then he heard a voice heavy with tears speak to him from the depths, saying, "My son Joseph, my son, I hear thy complaints and thy groans, and I saw thy tears, and I knew thy misery, my son. I am grieved for thy sake, and thy affliction is added to the burdens of my affliction. But my son Joseph, put thy trust in the Most High, and wait on him. Fear not, for the Most High is with you, and he will deliver thee from all evil. Go down, my son, go down into Egypt with thy masters, my son. Fear not, for the Most High is with thee, O my son." This and much more like unto it did the voice utter, and then it was silence. And Jehoshaphat, he listened in great amazement at first, and then he broke out in renewed tears. Angered thereby, one of the Ishmaelites drove him from his mother's grave with kicks and curses. Then Joseph entreated his masters to take him back to his father, who would give them great riches as a reward. But they said, "Why? Thou art a slave? How canst thou even know where thy father is? If thou had a free man as a father, thou would have not have been sold twice for a petty sum. And then their fury against him increased. They beat him and maltreated him, and he wept bitter tears. Now the Most High, upon the distress of Jehoshaphat, and he sent darkness to enshroud the land once more. A great storm raged, and the lightning flashed, and from the thunderbolts the whole earth trembled, and the Ishmaelites lost their way in their terror. The beasts and the camels, they stood still and beat them as their drivers would. They refused to budge from the spot, but crouched down upon the ground. Then the Ishmaelites spake to one another and said, Why had God brought this upon us? What are our sins? What are our trespasses that such things befall us? One of them said to the other, Preadventure. This has come upon us by reason of the sins which we have committed against the slave. Let us beg him earnestly to grant us forgiveness. And if then, maybe God will take pity and let these storms pass away from us, we shall know that we suffered harm on account of the injury we inflicted upon this slave. The Ishmaelites did according to the words, and they said unto Joseph, We have sinned against God, and we have sinned against thee. Pray to thy God and entreat him to take this death plague from us, for we acknowledge that we have sinned against him. And Joseph fulfilled their wish, and the Most High hearkened to his petition, and the storm was assuaged. All around became calm. And then the beasts arose from their recumbent positions, and the caravan could proceed upon its way. Now the Ishmaelites saw plainly that all of their troubles had come upon them for the sake of Jehoshaphat, and they spoke one to another, saying, We know now that all this evil has happened to us on account of this poor fellow. And wherefore should we bring death upon ourselves by our own doing? Let us take counsel together. What is to be done with this slave? One of them advised that Jehoshaphat his wish should be fulfilled, that they should take him back to his father. Then they would be sure of receiving the money that they had paid out for him. But this plan, it was soon rejected because they had accomplished a great part of their journey, and they were not inclined to retrace their steps, and they therefore resolved upon carrying Jehoshaphat to Egypt and selling him there. They would rid themselves of him in that way and also receive a great price for him. So they continued their journey as far as the borders of Egypt, and there they met 4 men, descendants of Midian, the sons of Abraham. And to these they sold Jehoshaphat for 5 shekels. The 2 companies, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites, they arrived in Egypt upon the same day. The latter, hearing that Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guards, was seeking a new good slave, and repaired to pay at once to try to dispose of Jehoshaphat to him. Now Potiphar was willing to pay as much as 400 pieces of silver. For high as the price was, it did not even seem too great for the slave that pleased him as much as Jehoshaphat. However, he made a condition. He said to the Midianites, I will pay you the price demanded, but you must bring me the person that sold you the slave. that I may be in a position to find out all about him. For the youth seems to me to be neither a slave nor the son of a slave. He appears to be of noble blood, and I must convince myself that he was not a slave. The Midianites brought the Ishmaelites to Potiphar, and they testified that Jehoshaphat was a slave, that they had owned him and had sold him to the Midianites. And Potiphar rested, satisfied with this report. And he paid the price, asked for Jehoshaphat. And the Midianites and the Ishmaelites, they all went their way.